I like this product. I think it's a great product, so I'm willing to pay for it.
I am so called out.
All right, so welcome back everyone again to another episode of Pen.
No.
Noobs.
Yes, another voice, another special unknown voice. But if you're on YouTube, you can totally see his face right now. We've got a special guest today. And let me just start with a few introductions, at least what this guy and his friends have done for our podcast. Today, we are joined by a very special podcaster, pen podcaster, and nib-grinder, among more other things. And well, it's in the description, it's on the title. It's CY of Tokyo Pens and the podcast Tokyo Inklings. So welcome CY to our special episode.
Welcome, CY.
Thank you so much, and super happy to be here. I actually just maybe a few hours ago was listening to your episode with Fig Boot, so kind of priming myself for what's gonna come on this episode.
This is awesome because we were also studying because I personally had already listened. I listened around 3 days after you released the most recent one. And I was listening to your most recent episode as of the time of this recording, and I came out of it wanting cats.
We actually have, let me see if I can find some cats. Oh, let me just shift the camera a bit. I mean, it's not very,
oh gosh,
you can see the cats over there.
Hey cats, hey kitties.
Yeah, so that sits on our cabinet that holds all the washi tapes.
Yes, washi tapes. Don't get me started with that. But I saw the shelf and I saw the cats, and then I listened to the episode, and now I have a craving for cats.
Yeah, the cats they're pretty cute, but I have to say they're not very good pen holders because the paws are too small and they're not really shaped in like a semicircle, so the pens fall off really easily. But I think that's actually one of the appeal to the cats is that you have to actually play with the balance a lot, so you're actually spending more time playing with the cats.
That's a good one.
Makes a lot of sense. But anyway, let's go ahead and start like this segment. This is actually the second not so noobs episode, but regardless of what type of episode it is, we start with this segment called Noob Discovery. So Ryan, what is this segment all about?
Yeah, so this new discovery, it's a play, it's a word play for the words new discovery. So we call it new discoveries. So in every episode that we have, we begin with us sharing our new discoveries for that week or for that month. So it could be anything about fountain pens, ink, stationery, and so on. So of course, we being our guest in today's episode, we do want to hear if you do have any new discovery as of late.
That's a really hard one. I guess one because of this whole Tomoe River drama, and I usually only use Tomoe River for my writing. So because of this Tomoe River drama, I've been forced to go and try to discover new paper that would suit my needs. And I've recently been really much into Graphilo. And yeah, it's a pretty expensive paper. I won't lie, it's not easy to find. But if in the case that Tomoe River does get discontinued, in the end, I do have a backup in Graphilo.
Oh, I hope that we have access to that as well sometime soon, Ryan.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Do you also ship that with your pens? Because like I know I've got a pending order with you. CY. Can I add that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can definitely send a bunch of Graphilo notebooks out over to you as well.
Oh gosh, I'm so excited. Honestly, like ever since Eunice of Sushi Fans said that she got a pen from you, I have just been like, no spend June is a real no spend because I've just been waiting for that one. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Anyway, we're gonna move on now and maybe like cover this list of questions that we have. It's not a lot and it's not
So what
strict.
about your new discoveries or
Oh,
new
oh,
discoveries?
okay.
Oh no, Jika.
Our nerves are getting ahead of us. Sorry, CY. Um, my noob discovery for this week was that a local brand called Shibui PH.
Mm-hmm.
They make covers and
Yep.
cases for pens. Apparently, you can have them personalize things.
Yeah. And
So
they look really good.
they look really good. I especially like the fact that, like, as opposed to other cases that are leather, their straps are made of, instead of garter, they're made of leather.
Mm, mm, mm,
So you
mm,
can adjust them, and like you just pull this tab over here as a
mm,
strap, and you don't have to worry about the garter stiffening
mm,
or having to
mm,
be
mm.
replaced over time. So most recently, I had them bring back an already phased out model for the Hobonichi A6. So
Mm,
instead of
mm.
getting one for the notebook, or like I think the A6 Techo, I had them make me one for the A6 5 year. So I'm gonna get that on Tuesday and I'm
Ah,
really excited about it. So do check it out. And as far as I know, CY, I think they can ship internationally as well. So
yeah,
if ever you
that's
get,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, like it's so hard to find covers for the 5 year because it's kind of like a weird format, right? Like not everybody does 5 year journals, and some people do 3 or 10 or whatever, and it's really only a thing in Japan, like 5 year journals. So it's actually pretty hard to get covers for those, and I know because I've been trying to get covers for mine as well. Mine is an A5, and I'm using the Superior Labor leather cover, and it's a really tight fit, but somehow it's working. I know Akane, she got one off of Etsy and it didn't really fit, and it kind of bent the back of her spine. Um, yeah, but I think it's okay. I mean, it's the cover, the base book itself. It's not like a super hard cover or anything. So as long as we find something that suits, I'm sure it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. And if ever they do ship to Japan, I'll give you a heads up on Instagram.
Thank you.
Sure. Ryan, what about you?
Well, mine isn't really a new discovery, or at least for people who are listening who are into this ink brand, it's not a new discovery, but for me it is. What makes it a new discovery, however, is that there is a special edition of the Robert Oster inks, and they have one exclusively for Galen leather. So it's called the Sooty Sheer Water. So there, if you do get to see it, it says there's Sooty Sheer Water, Galen leather. So it's a nice ink, and actually, um, 2 months ago, I wasn't into Robert Oster inks because I wanted my inks to have a nice bottle. I was so particular with the bottle. Like, I want my fountain pen inks to have a really nice bottle so that it feels very quote unquote legit. But I found, or actually, I've realized the appeal of the Robert Oster bottles because it's so easy to store. I mean, most of my inks would take up a lot of space. I'll get one sample, like let's say the Hiroshizuku. So it takes up a lot of space as compared to the Robert Oster. So it's just going to take little space compared to the Pilot Iroshizuku ink bottles. So there, that's not necessarily a new discovery, but I do like this ink from Robert Oster, and it's Soothie Shearwater, and it's exclusively from Galen Leather. So yeah, there, that's my new discovery.
Wow. Okay. How would you call this? Those are our noob discoveries for the week. So maybe sometime down the line and in our social media, you guys can also give yours. Oh, what's up next, Ryan?
Okay, so up next, let's now go to the meat of this this episode, which is really to have some questions with our special guests for this episode. Okay, so these questions, of course, we're not necessarily going to be very strict with just simply answering them. We can actually branch out and discuss more about other stuff. But we do want to know more about your experience with two things: podcasting and also nib grinding. So I'll start with the
Mhm.
first question. How did you get started on your pen journey and your
Yeah.
podcasting journey?
Uh, so those are like two different questions, right? It's the first is how did I get into pens, and the second is why did I or why did Jacob and I decide to create Tokyo Inklings? And um, I think the story with a lot of us in Asia probably goes back like a few decades ago when like we were students. Um, and I've said this on a few other podcasts as well, but I think when you're in Asia, like there's not really a moment when you kind of get into stationery because it's just everywhere. So, for example, right, if I, you know, the Pilot G2, that's a great pen for people in like the US or the UK, but you know, in Asia, that's like just what everybody is using. Um, Also, same thing with like we had these like pencil cases where you can press a button and like things shoot out of them, and things like that. So there's not a single moment where when I think I got into stationery in that particular sense, right? But I was always aware of like, okay, there's like station that I'm using, which is like the Pilot G2, which I thought was like a normal thing, and then there's like the nice stationery. So this is what they put up in like the billboards or the huge displays at the stationery shops. And I grew up in Hong Kong, by the way, so a big place for me to find stuff was a place called City Super, which is actually I think Patrick works there, particularly to merchandise stationery. But anyways, so at City Super there would always be these huge Lamy displays for Lamy safaris because they're kind of the affordable. Well, it didn't seem that way to me when I was a student, but they were the affordable fountain pen, but still they cost like a good $10-15.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't afford this. Right? I can't spend like 100 Hong Kong dollars on a pen. What am I, crazy? So I've always kind of wanted to use a fountain pen, specifically the Lamy Safari, but just because it kind of looks cool, right? Like everybody's using these ball pens, and suddenly there's this like thing, there's like a metal like sharp point, and kind of reminds you of being in some kind of movie that's set like 500 years ago. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool, but I don't think I can actually afford it. And then I was in China for one summer where we I was enrolled in like a handwriting kind of boot camp thing to like practice my Chinese, right? So like to practice my Chinese characters. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but actually, um, apparently in China, uh, fountain pens are kind of common, particularly like Hero and like Wing Sung, like really lower end pens that don't even get to the international market, right? So in at least in the place where I was, um, when we went to this fountain pen or when we went to this like handwriting boot camp, we all got like two or three fountain pens, and they all had the squeeze bladder, the squeeze bladder fillers. So Pilot used to call them Con 20s.
Yeah.
And um, first of all, it never worked for me. The problem with these pens is that they don't work, right? And they're like scratchy, but still, it was kind of cool. But because they didn't work, I just threw them away. And they're like whatever. And fast forward, I graduated. I went to university in France, and in a lot of parts of Europe, they use fountain pens at school. So, um, sorry, backtrack. Maybe backtrack 1 year. When I was in high school in the U.S., we went to a kind of school trip to Vietnam, and we had a few chaperones. And one of the students, his parents lived in Vietnam, so we all went to his house, and his mother cooked us dinner. It was really, really great. And as we were leaving, one of the chaperones wrote a thank you message to the classmate's mother, and he had such beautiful handwriting. It was incredible. He was like writing some Spencerian stuff with like I don't know, It was incredible. And I was like, wow, what if I need to like thank somebody in the future? Like, I don't want to embarrass myself. Right? I need to make sure that I can write something that's like not embarrassing so that if I ever need to thank somebody, I can actually do something like that and maybe impress them a bit. So fast forward, I'm in university in France, and a lot of places still use fountain pens. And one of my classmates, she was from, I think she's French, but she grew up in Switzerland, and she was using a fountain pen. I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. And I remembered I used these fountain pens in back in China for that one summer. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I should give it a go again. So I go into the supermarket, and in the supermarket, they were selling the Pilot Petite. And if you're not aware, Pilot Petite, I think a lot of people are more familiar with like Metropolitan, but the Pilot Petite is like really small. It's about like this big, a really pocket pen. It's maybe half the size of the Metropolitan. It's all plastic, and you could get like a pack of 3 for like €5, and they're like cartridge only, and blue ink, steel nib, and so I bought a pack, and I started using it. It was like one of the smoothest steel nibs I've ever used in my life, and I was like, wow, this is pretty great. It's fantastic. So I bought it, and about 2 weeks later, I went into like the local pen shop. There was like a pen shop. I went into the pen shop, and I bought myself a Parker Sonnet, a gold nib 18K Parker Sonnet. It's like 2 weeks, right? It was like 100 something euros, and that might have been the worst pen that I've ever written with in my life. And like at first, I was like, oh, maybe it's like the paper fibers are like catching in the nib, and I didn't really like it. I prefer my puppeteer, so I think I dropped it or something. And then, being an idiot, I went back to the shop and I bought the second one of the same model, which was also really, really terrible. And ever since then, I've just sworn off of Parkers. But um, so I finished my first year. I'm kind of into fountain pens a bit, but it's really like the low end. I think I bought like a nice €40 kit pen from some other random stationery store. And um, that summer, I worked at a law firm, and we didn't get paid a lot, but we got some money for it. And I decided that I'm going to buy myself something nice. And in Hong Kong, there are these like literal like hole in the wall shops, just lined with luxury pens. Um, so in Central, I was walking, and I saw a Mont Blanc 145 in burgundy, and that is a discontinued model. Red is one of my favorite colors, and I got suckered into buying it for about $350. And this pen has an oblique medium nib on it. Now, I didn't know what it was. I opened I saw it. I was like, oh, this looks kind of pretty. And of course, the shopkeeper knew, so he was like, "Yeah, this is really rare. Like, you won't find this again." Blah 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 blah. I was like, "Okay, yeah, fine, I'll buy it." So I bought it at this oblique medium nib, which I struggled with for years. It was a pleasure to write with it, but because it's not a round nib, so there was a lot of challenges to use it. But what I really appreciated was that it kind of gave my handwriting this extra flair that a round nib doesn't. So it's kind of like a stubborn and italic. And I used this this Mont Blanc 145R with Mont Blanc's lavender purple. Same pen, same ink for about 6 to 7 years.
Oh.
So one pen, one ink, and I would switch between cartridges and the converter. And the cool thing about that pen is you can actually fit 2 cartridges into the pen body. But yeah, it was like very much. Obviously, it's a very nice pen. At that time, I was like, doesn't really get better than this, right? Like, doesn't really get better than a than a Mont Blanc. Um, and I thought to myself, if I were to buy another pen, if I were to justify buying another pen, it would have to be better than this one. But if I'm trying to buy a pen that's better than this one, then I probably can't afford it. So, so I think about 6-ish years afterwards, I bought my first kind of pen after that. It was a Sailor 1911 Pro Fit in Naginata Togi MF.
Okay.
And I bought it because it was supposed to be really good for like, Chinese or Japanese characters. And at that time, my thinking was, well, I have an oblique medium for writing in Latin characters, and then I can get this naginata for like writing in like Chinese or Japanese. I have basically the best pen for everything I need now. It turns out that the NMF was really, really fat, and I didn't really like writing with it at the time. So I just kind of, put it aside, and I spent like, a few more years. Now, 2018 in December, I went on a trip with Akane, and we went to Kyoto, and I discovered this auction app in Japan. I was like, oh, auction, secondhand. So, what do I look up? I look up Mont Blanc. And I found that, oh, you can buy like these Mont Blancs for like 5,000 yen. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna put a bid on it. And I didn't know how to use these auction apps. I put up a bid on it, and in the end, I ended up paying for like 10,000 Japanese yen for this Mont Blanc, which is not a bad price, right?
Yeah.
But actually, that was like a very low end Mont Blanc, which was actually not worth not worth this money. So the issue with those pens were that it was a Mont Blanc generation, and it's not very well known for a specific reason because it's not a very good pen. But it was very prone to cracking near the nib. And I think I bought like 5 of them, and all of them had the same crack in the same place. And I was thinking, like, if I buy 5 of them, put the parts together, and I get one working pen, that's worth it. I bought 5 of them. None of them worked. They all had the same crack in the exact same place. I was like, man, I'm so stupid. But because I had discovered this auction app, I started like bidding on all sorts of different pens. And then this kind of goes into like my nib grinding story, but then I downloaded like eBay. Yeah. And then I go on eBay, I'm like looking, and I see like, and I go on Reddit, and I see like Gourmet Pens. She has this like flexible music nib, like this flexible Waterman music nib, and I'm like, damn, that's so cool. I really want one. But it was like $300, like on eBay at the time. It's like Waterman, 3-tined music nib, $300 to $400. I'm like, man, I can't pay that. And then I had the crazy idea, and I said to myself, well, why don't I go make one? So it turns out it's much more costly to make one than to buy one. Especially because you can't even buy those anymore. They don't exist on eBay anymore. But I ended up going down this rabbit hole. Okay, why don't I like make one, do it myself? Bought like 10 Pilot music nibs, ground a bunch of them, and now I can pretty reliably recreate and make these 3-tine music nibs. But the initial investment was just not worth it at all. But I had a lot of fun, and I discovered that actually I could grind nibs and create a writing experience that I wanted. And that's how I kind of got into nib grinding. Yeah. So I know that was like a huge, like 20-minute monologue. Your second question was, how did I get into podcasting?
Yeah, podcasting.
So in, when I was like researching like naginata and stuff like that, there was really only 2 places where you can find reliable information on Japanese pens in English. The first site was Bruno Taut's blog. and the second website was Ross Stutler's blog. And then I guess there's like FPN, but that was not really reliable. Um, and I'm sad to say that Bruno, there's been some controversy with him in the past few years, particularly his views on COVID and racism and things like this. But I have to admit that his blog was a really influential resource, but it was so limited in its scope, in the sense that it only focused on like vintage pens, or like 80% of it is like vintage pens. It's clearly written by like an old white guy, who's like kind of in the Black Pen Society, and it was just like, all right, there's like this one guy who kind of writes weirdly in like the third person and calls his blog a chronicle. Um, and then there's this other guy, Ross Stutler, who's actually extremely good at writing. His articles are fantastic, but hasn't been active since 2006. So um, so there's essentially not a source of information for the fountain pen scene in Japan, uh, in the English language, which is quite weird, right? Because Japan is one of the largest manufacturers of fine writing instruments in the world.
True. Yeah.
So at the time, there was also one more blog, which was fudefan.com. And what differentiated fudefan.com from the other two was that fudefan.com had just amazing photography, amazing prose. His writing was really good, investigative, and it was just it was like it was really inspiring to read his work. And actually, um he went to Pelican Hubs in I think 2018. And I asked him on Reddit. He wrote a blog post about it. And I asked him on Reddit. I was like, hey, how do I get into these like Wagner events? Are they kind of foreigner friendly? Because in Japan it's not always foreigner friendly, which is a shame. But it was, reading his blog was super informative, and I managed to meet Furifan and the now unfortunately disgraced Bruno Taut, and among others, and those people who regularly appear on our podcast. I managed to meet them and join their pen community in I think the early months of 2019, and I was like, you know what, we should make a podcast because there's just not a lot of information, and one of the only podcasts that were revolving around pens at that time was the Pen Addict. There was also, of course, Gula Q&A, which I really enjoyed. Big fan of their new podcast called the Pencast. Shout out to them; they're really great. But what we noticed, what Fudefan and I noticed, was that either the information will be like 3 or 4 months late. So, we will have had this discussion, and then 3 months later, they're like, oh my God, we heard about this new pen. And when we hear that on the podcast, we're like, but that happened like a couple months back. So we decided, hey, let's do a podcast. And this was in the middle of 2019. And then, of course, the conversation was, okay, let's do a podcast, let's do a podcast, let's do a podcast. But it wasn't until 2020 when really, we were like, oh, let's do a podcast. And there were like a few different people who wanted to be part of it. And in 2020, I was like, you know what, it's too hard to organize all of you fools. Fudefan, buy a microphone. We're going to record on like Saturday. So wrote out this draft of what would be our first episode. We recorded. At first, we didn't even know how to record. We used like the Anchor app, which I don't really recommend if you're starting out as a podcaster. Now, I was recording with my AirPods, not even AirPod Pros, right? Like the OG AirPods. Record it into Anchor. We're like, wait, why is the audio like not synchronized? We had to like put everything back into no, no, that was one track, a single track, and then I imported that into my computer, and then I had to cut and do like editing wizardry so that it doesn't sound like Fudefan was or Jacob was speaking over me because the audios were not synced properly. So um so that was the origins of the podcast, and the idea really is to deliver information um that's locked in Japan, because a lot of Japanese news, it's really exciting, but it's locked in Japanese. So deliver that information to the English speaking, the wider English speaking community across the world, so that this kind of knowledge isn't just trapped in Japan and other people get to enjoy that.
Okay. I know, CY, that you said that that was like a really long monologue, but as English teachers, we totally appreciate it because we're like, yes, storytelling is happening. There is a plot, a rising action, a climax, and a resolution.
Oh
So
my gosh.
I could
I would
totally relate. Like, I think given that we're new at this, like the whole experience is very familiar, especially in the podcasting part. That's why we have questions related to that and questions
Yeah.
with regard to nib grinding. And I love that you mention the pen addict and Gule Q&A, because like I actually discovered you through the pen addict. I discovered your
Nice.
podcast through them, and it was because of Sailor Plus and Sailor Minus. It was exactly those two episodes wherein I was like, right, because I had just gotten my milk colors, the pink one and the blue one, and I was like, so why did I get it at this price? I want to understand if I overpaid or I underpaid for a particular pen. And then I found out, oh, they're getting phased out. And I got so excited because like suddenly you realize that you got this part of history that's getting phased out. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm talking really quickly, but like your podcast alongside the pen addict, and now like there are a lot of other podcasts that are springing up about the hobby, and it's just wow. Like I am at a loss of words that there's so many of us right now, and like we offer different things to the community. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have to take this opportunity to really thank Brad and Mike for what they've done, because I think they're really like pioneers in this space. Fountain pens writing, that's like a very visual element. So who thought that this like audio podcast would be a success? But they really paved the road for a lot of the other podcasts that exist now. So like Nib section, ourselves, yourselves. Uh, it's really like they thought they did what other people thought was like not possible, and as a result, we get to kind of enjoy and have multiple points of views as well. So you know, I kind of threw shade at them a bit earlier, but I really think that what they've done for the pen community, specifically for the pen creators community, is really important.
That's true. That's true. And which leads me to actually bring up that please pimp out the Discord that you created at the end of the episode, please.
Okay.
Okay, Ryan, what's our wait, I'm lost in our questions, but what's next?
we are interested to know how do you keep up with all of these things that you're doing? Like you're doing podcasting, nib grinding, acquiring pens, and having a day job.
Right. Yeah. Um. So I think one of the reasons why I got more into like the hobby part, um, in a way, was because I was working at Gucci from 2018, and I wasn't very fulfilled with my job. I mean, it was an interesting job. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff, but kind of corporate culture, especially in retail, especially in luxury retail, the kind of internal politics, that was kind of bringing me down a bit. And um, at that time, I wanted to use uh, Instagramming about my hobby to kind of stay in touch with what I was doing previously, which was more like digital marketing, like influencer marketing kind of work. And so that's really the origins of Tokyo Station Pens, was to keep myself connected to what I was doing before, so that if I want to go back, I can actually cite something that I've done. Um, and so because I wasn't feeling very motivated at work, you know, bathroom breaks happen often, and and I'm just checking my phone, and yeah, even to this day, I won't lie, it's a lot of work. Um, I don't really have weekends. I mean, I have weekends, but those weekends involve me working in some kind of capacity regarding pens. After I clock out at my day job, I go grind pens for people. Um, when I wake up in the morning, I have usually anywhere from 5 to 15 messages on Instagram, and I reply to those. So it's really whenever I have some time, like if I'm showering, I'm like scrolling. Okay, do I have anything that I need to address? So it's there's no break, there's no pause, and it's hard. It's pretty tough, and it sounds awful when I say it like that, but it's also very rewarding because you're also creating something kind of for yourself. You're creating something like your own business. It's also creating your own legacy, and you know, I I think one of the most rewarding things is people when they receive a pen that I've ground for them, and they just say, this was basically even more than I expected, and like I didn't even know that I would like something like this. That's really rewarding. Um, and I learned a lot about you know what it's like to run your own business, to be really responsible for pulling revenue in. By the way, I'm not, so that's my focus for this year, is to actually make money. But yeah, I've lost money doing this for the past 2 years because I price things lower, or I'm reinvesting in like machines. I'm reinvesting in like tools that I need. So you know and there are failures too, right? Like there, I think I said earlier, I bought like 10 pilot music nibs, and only one of them were a success. So you know it's hard. It's hard, but it's it's worth it, worth spending that time if you're learning and getting something out of that.
We needed to hear that, Ryan. We needed to hear that. We're just starting out, but like,
Just starting out. Although Jika and I did agree that when we wanted to do this podcast, it was just really, for us to talk about our interest. And it's nice to hear that really, when people start out indeed with their podcast, they just really want to do it for themselves. It's something to help them
Yeah.
um, get away from the stress of their day job, or
Yep.
to help them connect with people of the same interest. So that it's nice to hear that we
Yep.
um, podcast people actually share the same kind of ethos, same kind of belief when it comes to what we're doing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
and also, I mean, Jacob, my co-host on Tokyo Inklings, the reason why our podcast is bi-weekly is because Jacob is very, very busy, because he's actually a quite senior person at a very, very large corporation.
ooh,
So, um, so we're all leading like super, super busy lives, and that's why I kind of volunteer to really um, you know, we both edit the podcast, right? I edit the first pass and he edits the second pass. It's something that we've been thinking about, is to start monetizing, um, because we spend a lot of money to do this, and I'm sure you know as well. But a part of me also, I guess, it's also about like finding the time to do that, and then if you don't have time to think about how to monetize, and you end up not doing it, and then lost opportunities. But yeah,
Yeah. We started out of passion, but we're understanding that indeed some things do have to be monetized. We got to
yeah,
fall into that capitalist structure. Kidding. But that recent question was actually a question we were very much invested in because, like, we know
yeah,
that you guys are very busy. Teaching is very involved work as well. So,
yeah.
like, from someone who's been doing it for almost 2 years, a year and a half, am I
Year
right?
and a bit, year and a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was something that we needed to hear, which leads me, I think, to the last podcast question, and that's really you and your podcast has offered something new, as you said, that wasn't covered by previous podcasts, the predecessors, the forefathers. So, given that there are quite a few new podcasts coming out, ours included, there is. I'm not really sure how old the nib section is or the stationery cafe is, and there's like recently I found out about Tinterias, which
Mhm.
is based in Mexico. What do you think the pen podcasting community hasn't covered yet or should cover that we
Mm.
haven't yet?
Yeah. Um, Before I answer that question, I do want to circle back about the capitalist comment. I actually disagree because what we're doing is work, right? Like content creation is work. So, um, so you should get compensated for that, right? Like content is not free. I think that's what a lot of listeners don't understand is that it's it's not easy and it's not free to create this. Obviously, it's free for them to consume it,
Yeah.
but it's I don't think it's like particularly capitalistic for you to own your labor and for you to be paid for that labor. So in fact, I think that's actually quite socialist. So, anyways, um,
Thank
uh,
you.
moving on from the politics, I think that's a different podcast which I'm happy to have with you.
Yes, please.
um, I think pen podcasting is is alive and well as long as people do it right. And what's really great about all of these different podcasts is that we all have a particular perspective on um on the hobby. So I'll give you an example, right? Uh the Pen Addict, when you listen to that podcast, is very clear that it is a general but specifically pen related podcast. So it's not a stationary podcast. It is specific about pens, but not specific to fountain pens. Um, our podcast is specific to fountain pens, and it's even more niche than that. The nib section is a podcast that is specific to fountain pens, but it also looks at it from a more, I think, macro point of view, a more like, let's say, retail friendly point of view. Um, and they talk a lot about stuff like out of the box, and they have to be out of the box. Um, and you have the stationery cafe, which is a general overall stationery podcast that also talks about fountain pens because they're part of a more general aesthetic. And for you, you are a specifically, I think, pen podcast, but from a lens of somebody who's really trying to, let's say, get in. I don't want to say catch up because I don't think you can ever stop catching up, even for us. Like, we're always catching up, but to kind of discover what already exists and have your take on that and how you can kind of approach that. So I hope I got that right.
So did. So, is there anything that you want to hear specifically from pen podcasting, or like what kind
Yeah,
of content are you craving for as of recent?
yeah. Um, I really like the Station podcast, not because they're doing it on purpose, right? But I really like the happy hour from the Stationery Cafe because it looks at it particularly from a non male lens, because I think it's very easy. You look at the general fountain pen community, it's very male skewed, and I think their perspective which is specifically not male, is very refreshing. And we've said it on our podcast as well. We think that the future of the hobby, any hobby really, is should lean towards more younger audiences, more female audiences. And so something that's really interesting is if you look at like um, a following like mine, where I have about 65% male following versus 35% female following. And then you talk to somebody like April, which is like the exact opposite, right? Like, so in that way, they're seeing something that's totally different. And for me, that's super interesting. I think that there should be more things like this. You mentioned earlier, uh, I can't say this because it's a Spanish word, but Tintieras.
Yeah.
They are a Spanish-speaking podcast. I think that's super interesting. I personally don't listen to it because I don't understand Spanish, but I think they're really interesting because they have a angle which looks at specifically like they are able to talk to a lot of retailers, so not the manufacturers, but the people who are actually distributing the products in that area. So just different perspectives that are not the same old that we have, like not the and Stephen Brown, SBRE Brown, he was great. Fig Boots, he's great, but there are so many people like that, especially if you go on like Fountain Pen Network. I want to hear from more like younger people. I want to hear from like more female people, non-male people, just all across the spectrum, because I think there's a lot of different ways to approach that.
Okay, I feel so included right now. Thank you, God, for making me a woman. Thank you.
Sorry, Ryan.
Actually, if you do take a look at when it comes to the Philippines, my observation, the market in the Philippines, I think there are more female fountain pen users. The younger ones usually.
Yeah.
But our listeners are 62% from the US. They're mostly English speakers, and there's like 12% from the Philippines. So a lot of things factor into that. I think ours is really economics and access.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're trying to bridge. And maybe that's why our content is like this, because like the more the merrier.
Yeah.
Go girl.
And I mean, you won't believe this, but like, I think general fountain pen sales, it probably skews very heavily towards men. But my fountain pen sales are 80% women, and women spend more than men. Women spend more with me on men, more often with me than men, and have a higher average unit price than men. So men are much more price sensitive. They're like, oh, it's too expensive, I don't want to do it. Whereas women are more like, okay, I like this product, I think it's a great product, so I'm willing to pay for it.
I am so called out. I'm buying a pen from you. So I totally understand this. Like when I wanted that Hachimonji Yakubo Sakura, I was like, I missed it the first time. I know someone who can get it for me. And then he does special nib grinds and stack nibs. I was like, yes, I am in regardless of price. Yes, thank you, CY.
They haven't restocked on that yet, but I think they're saying now mid to late summer maybe they're gonna restock.
That's totally okay. I'm actually having second thoughts right now at this point because, like, in the podcast, your most recent one, you were talking about the Twilight one from Bungo Box, and I was like, do I tell him?
Oh, I have an extra of that.
Oh dear God! Let's talk after recording.
We can swap.
We might switch, which
Okay.
leads us to talking about nib grinding. Because if I get that Twilight, and nib grinds included. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, actually, we are curious to know what makes a nib actually good. Is there such a thing as a good nib and a bad nib? And if there is such a thing as a bad nib, like what makes a nib quote unquote bad?
There is definitely such a thing as a bad nib, and what makes a nib bad. I've encountered two types. The first type is more common. It has a bad nib grind. The second type is that the alloy that they use is bad. So the first type, the nib grind, is bad. How this can happen is that you might have somebody else who's grinding the nib who doesn't really know what they're doing, and they've either taking too much tipping off, or they've changed the shape to be like this weird shape that kind of goes against the physics of writing, because a lot of nib grinding is actually thinking about the physics of how your your nib touches the paper and how that would then make the ink flow. So that's how you can have a bad nib. You can also have a bad nib if, for example, um, and how I determine whether a nib is acceptable or not is, um, so here you have, like, let's say the tines, right? And a lot of times you'll see that in Western nibs, particularly Yogo, you'll have the tines that kind of are like this and they don't touch, and you'll see some light through it. For me, I consider that a bad nib. Why do I consider that a bad nib? It's not because it doesn't write. Often it might write, it might even write well, but why I consider that a bad nib is because you would never be able to grind a nib like that to an extra fine without closing the time gap. So for me, a good nib is a nib that is first well ground. Second of all, you should be able to regrind that into a needle point without messing with the tine alignments, um because like that's for me the mark of paying attention to how you've done that nib. The second type, which is bad alloys. Bad alloys can happen. I've seen some in the past. Recently, I was playing with a Omas Extra Flexible, which it was so soft and mushy that the tines didn't go back to where they were supposed to be, even though you're not really applying a lot of pressure. So that could be possibly because the previous owners had splayed it too many times, or some other factors. But for me, that would be a bad nib if it doesn't keep its shape.
Ooh, that's actually an interesting word. Now that I think about it, there are nibs that are kind of quote unquote mushy. Yeah, I've experienced those kinds of nibs as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are those that are super hard, or like
Yeah.
really they don't bounce. There's just a lack of bounciness to it.
Yeah. For me, the company that made the best nibs is Pilot.
Yes. Yes.
I agree.
Pilot makes the best nibs, but they make the most boring bodies.
What's that? Sorry.
They make the most boring
The
bodies.
boring bodies. Yeah. I do agree. Their designs are kind of boring. Like probably the most interesting one
Yeah.
is the custom A23. Well, for the
Yeah.
most,
Great pen.
yeah.
I've got one. I've got one here.
Oh yay! I also have one. I think.
And check it out.
Ooh,
This
What's that?
is a job by Bokmondo. I don't know if you can
Oh no. Oh no.
see. This is because of the lighting. So there's those sparkles. Those are actually solid gold dots.
oh,
Solid
beautiful.
gold?
Yeah. And then I also have this one, which is a custom 90 custom heritage 92, which I've stacked the nib, so I've made this into a 2-layer naginata nib now. And of course, they don't make this color anymore, which is a shame because this purple color is quite a nice color.
The pen envy is really strong right now. Thanks, CY, for showing all of that. Doesn't help that I watched Inky Rox's video fairly recently about her Bokumondo visit.
Yeah.
It's like that's another thing on the list.
Yeah.
Dear.
Oh my Jika, I think that's a sign already for you to get a custom A23.
Or go to Japan when we're finally
Yeah.
vaccinated. So
That's right.
Yeah, actually. Okay, so now, CY, this part is the quote unquote juicy part of
All right.
the podcast, and it's our Noober Have I Ever segment. So we're just gonna give you a bunch of statements, and you just have to say yes or no, and then if you'd like to elaborate or tell us more about that one, feel free to do so. It's basically a play, another word play, this time for Never Have I Ever.
Sounds good.
We don't have drinks. We don't have any drinks here, but yeah. So we have, how many is this? I think we have four
Or
statements, four
Okay.
statements, and then I'll start with Nuber have I ever, and then I'll continue the statement, and then let us know if it's a yes or a no.
All right.
All right. So the first one is Nuber have I ever been satisfied with a nib out of the box?
That's a very interesting question. I will say yes, I have been satisfied with a nib out of the box. The question is for how long?
so for how long is the shortest or the longest time that you've been satisfied with a nib?
I mean, I use the same pen for 7 years, so I guess that's a long time.
That's true.
And then I had that reground afterwards.
Well, that's a long time,
That's
7
a long
years.
time. That's a long
I'm
time.
not I've not committed to a pen that long. Amazing.
If you don't mind us asking, which pen is this?
Oh, it's the Mont Blanc that I was referring to previously, the oblique medium.
Oh, okay, beautiful, beautiful.
Next Nuber. Next Nuber have I ever is um Nuber have I ever told myself I'm only sticking to a specific nib type. Does that make sense? Or is it kind of a repeat, Ryan? Can you modify it, you think?
No, no, no. I think it's more of like you're just gonna stick to, oh, I'm just into medium. I'm just gonna stick to medium, or I'm just gonna stick to extra fine, or I'm just gonna stick to Japanese nibs, or I'm gonna stick
Yeah.
to Western nibs.
Yep. The answer is yes. I've told myself that I'm only going to stick to non-factory grinds.
Ooh.
So the opposite of what you were asking. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's the reason why I didn't buy a pen for such a long time, that I was satisfied with what I had, was because I just found the round nibs to be kind of boring. B, F, M, and B. So what? And starting to grind nibs kind of brought me back into actually the purchasing part of the hobby. So I told myself I'm never going to use, for myself at least, a factory nib.
Mm, okay. Okay, we get that. We need more nib grinders in this country. We know like 3 so far, so we gotta do our research.
Yeah,
Ryan,
I
what's the
heard
next?
I
Oh,
heard John Lim is pretty good.
yeah. John Lim.
Ryan, he
Yeah,
got his
John.
from John Lim.
Yeah, John Lim is pretty good. I had mine, my Pelican. I have a Pelican M400. It's originally a medium nib, but I had it turned into cursive italic.
Yeah.
So because I found the Pelican nibs to be very thick. I mean, the medium is quite thick
Yeah.
and very wet. And then I had it grinded to cursive italic. And now I want to use it for my signatures. I think it adds some form of character.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's John Lim. Next, Nuber, have I ever wished a pen had a Japanese or Western nib or vice versa? Like, let's say you have a Pelican or like a Western pen, and then you wish it had a Japanese nib, or the other way around.
No. Um, I have never wished that. I have wished that the nib was gold instead of steel.
Oh, why is that the case?
It's just a rule for myself. I only use gold nib pens. I'm a gold nib snob. Um, so steel nibs not for me. There's also a practical element because gold does not react. So if you're using like all kinds of inks, for example, iron gall inks, you shouldn't really use them in your steel nib pens because I'm not saying that this will happen, but there is a potential for it to actually create pits into your nibs and create holes. So, so why not just be safe and just stick with gold nib pens? And plus, looking at where the market is going now, I can get a gold nib pen secondhand for less than what some of the US makers are charging for a steel nib pen.
Oh, I get
Even
that.
Pilot, right?
Yes.
Pilot,
Yeah.
this pen Pilot, Pilot Custom Heritage 92. It's like $160. That's a lot less than a lot of the custom makers are asking for a steel nib, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. Okay, I think we're down to the last Noober have I ever, and it is Noober have I ever asked someone else to grind the nib of a pen that I own?
Uh, I have done this. I have done this. But that was uh before I started grinding nibs. So I asked Mike Masayama, to do two nibs for me. Um, one was to make that original OM nib a bit sharper, a bit crisper, and the second was to do an italic on my Caran d'Ache.
Oh wow. So wait, in gist, let me just get the number of years of experience here. You have been into pens since, or like for how long? How many years?
I bought my first pen with my own money since 2011.
Ooh.
11 years. Podcasting for a little
10
bit
years.
over
10 years.
10 years. Oh yeah, it is 2021. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of school years. Um, sorry. But podcasting for a year, almost a year and a half, 10 years into pens. How long for nib grinding?
Maybe around 2 to 3 years.
Oh, that doesn't look like 2 to 3 years. Like I see people starting to learn how to stack nibs. And I'm like, I even knew about your nib stacking before your podcast, and I've wanted one for a long time. So thank you for providing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's really it for Noober Have I Ever and the meat of this podcast. But see why you have a lot of social media handles, and where can we find you, and what other like Discord stuff do you have? This is the time.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So, my name's CY. I have a website at tokyostationpens.com. You can find me on Instagram at tokyostationpens, on Twitter at tokyostationmnh. Additionally, I just thought that, stationery creators, one of the big hurdles is like understanding, okay, where do we start? Like, what equipment do we need? What do I need to do? What's my schedule? How do I make money off of this? And a lot of those questions, we had at the beginning of our podcast. What equipment do we use? Do we use Zoom? Do we use something else? And there's really nowhere to like find the answers to these questions. So I've recently created a Discord channel. Let me see what I called it. I don't remember what I called it.
I too am
It
part of
is
it.
called Stationary Creators Club,
Ooh.
and in it I have rooms for streamers, podcasters, YouTubers, Instagrammers, bloggers. You can ask stuff about like equipment. You can talk about like stats. Like one of the things, right, is like, okay, what about listenership stats? Like when do I how do I benchmark my numbers, right? Because people don't really like to talk about their statistics to other people, um, at least not openly, right? So place where you can talk about stats, public resources. Maybe you want to collab with somebody else. So I've just created this Discord. If you want to get into this Discord, DM me on Instagram. The best place to actually find me and talk to me is on Instagram. I have some pages on my website, but I don't really check them. So Instagram is the way to go. But yeah, I also host a podcast. Co-host a podcast called Tokyo Inklings. We are in our second year. We do bi-weekly episodes, and yeah, it'll be really great if you could drop us a follow, subscribe. If you already listen to the podcast, make sure you help us write a review. An honest review. Doesn't have to be 5 stars because my podcasting partner is very skeptical of all of the 5-star reviews. But we do read our reviews every episode. So yeah, help us do a review. Tell your friends, tell your family members, tell your coworkers, whoever it may be.
Yes. And thank you, CY, again for joining us for this episode. And, maybe sometime in the future we can have Jacob on here as well. If he manages to get out of some heavy work. And that's really it, guys. Thanks for tuning in again. I am Jika.
And I'm Ryan.
And he is.
Bye.
Yes. And we'll see you in the next episode of Pen.
Noobs.
Noobs.